Like, for example, I researched and like made plans to use cloth diapers. And then when my daughter was born, I was just like, forget that.
Welcome to the Unaparent podcast, the place that delivers deeply human stories about the unapparent truths of parenting. My name is Katia Lindor, and I am your host. Join us as we debunk myths surrounding parenthood and provide an empathetic, judgment-free space for parents and parents to be. We hope you enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. Today, we have a very special guest. Her name is Krystal Persaud, and she is obsessed with developing products that fall in the intersection of education, technology, and society. Anything else is not worth designing. She is the founder of Grouphug, a company that designs and sells her patented window solar charger. She uses design to showcase solar in new, exciting ways, from designing a giant cat-shaped solar panel that meows to even a turtle-shaped solar panel. Her designs have been featured on The Today Show, CNBC, The Wall Street Journal, and even ABC Shark Tank, where she won an investment from Mark Cuban. She's an adjunct instructor of interaction design at NGIT, SVA, and Parsons. She graduated from Georgia Tech with a BS in industrial design. She most recently launched a new venture called WildGrid, a planning tool that helps people electrify their homes one easy step at a time. Krystal, that all sounds so impressive.
I'm tired
Did I
just hearing
anything?
all of that, honestly.
Did I cover most of it? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes. Oh, well, I mean, relevant to this podcast, one thing to add is that I have a 1-year-old daughter.
Wow.
So also
that is, I'd say, the most impressive on top of it all.
Yes. The hardest, by far the hardest thing I've ever done.
Well, that's saying something, because it sounds like you've done some hard stuff. So tell us a little bit about, I guess, where your inspiration was born to pursue what it is that you do. Please, if you don't mind, sharing that with us.
Yeah, so it honestly started for me. I won't go all the way back, but really in college, where as a kid growing up, I was very creative, but I didn't like quite have an outlet, and I didn't know what to do with that creativity. And I'm first generation Guyanese, so I'm first gen American, and I think my parents really wanted me to be like a doctor or lawyer or engineer, like the classic professions, not for any bad reasons, just because it's very stable and they wanted me to be, safe and secure. But I really wanted to be a painter, which was not at all what they wanted. But I ended up finding the field of industrial design, which is basically, to me, was like the perfect mix of art and design and engineering, where you create products and you create solutions to problems that you face. And that's really where I went to Georgia Tech, studied industrial design, and just fell in love with the idea that design is such a powerful tool, and that, we use products every day that you maybe don't realize, like your phone. Your phone was designed by incredible industrial designers, making everything so intuitive, or even like your mug or your toothbrush, your shoes, like everything was designed. And it's really an incredible, I think, privilege to be able to design these interactions that people use thousands of times every single day. And I just found it really exciting. And I think you could do so much good with that. And where I got into sustainability was really from how much responsibility that felt, that if you make a bad design decision, all of a sudden you're creating garbage. And it was really like paralyzing for me in school.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And the fact that you decided to go the route that sort of included your passions, in a way you didn't fit yourself into like a box, and found ways to really do something that felt impactful and important, and also you were being creative. That's super cool.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, that that pressure of what you're doing could just as well have a negative impact on society, and something as simple as, oh, you created something that's going to be that's single use and
Yeah.
just going to be thrown away every day and just be trash.
Yeah. Like imagine the thing you worked on every day ended up as garbage. And I was just like, oh my God. Like I could not do that.
Yeah.
It just feels like, I don't know, like I said, it just feels like such a responsibility that everything you put out there should be thought through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. That's awesome. And so on that note, having become a parent now and with little kids, as you know, with diapers and everything, so many things that kids use are single use and turn
Yeah.
into garbage. It's been hard for me personally to find ways to be as sustainable as I can with a child who like outgrows things, and so many of their toys are plastic. I definitely try to always buy like wooden toys and make sure that it's not plastic. Also, don't want anything her ingesting anything like that. And it's been quite a journey of me kind of accepting that I'm never going to be like perfect at, well, anything really, but sustainability has really been something I've always strived for. But with a kid, it's hard. It's hard.
It's so hard.
So I'd like to know, how you view that, and what your thoughts are on just being a parent of a small child and incorporating this sustainability into that.
Yes, it's so hard. And I think the part that I honestly felt unprepared for was like the mental load that you have as a mom and as a parent, and that really takes up space for, at least for me, for like what I felt like I could even do. So like for example, I researched and like made plans to use cloth diapers. And then when my daughter was born, I was just like, forget that. Like I just do not have the mental capacity to deal with another thing on top of just being a new mom, and adjusting to your body and adjusting to not sleeping, and I just didn't want to adjust to one more thing. And I probably think about it multiple times a week, and I feel so guilty for using. I don't know if you deal with the guilt too. Like sometimes I feel so guilty
Mm-hmm.
for not using the cloth diapers, but at the end of the day, like your sanity is so important, and if you couldn't handle it, then you got to protect yourself and sort of what you want to do. But there's so many things that I think I had, like I think I definitely struggle with being kind of a perfectionist, and like I'll make plans and then the plans don't happen, and then it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And I think for me, motherhood was so much of that, where I made plans for all glass bottles and like diapers and all the like organic formula, all this stuff. And then when the day came, I was like, you know what? I just have to do what feels right in the moment, which wasn't always the most
Mm-hmm.
sustainable option. So I mean, I feel like my advice to other moms would just be to do what you can handle, because at the end of the day, if you're overwhelmed, it's not that's not
It's not
sustainable.
sustainable.
That's not
Right.
sustainable. And I
Yeah.
think like there's a couple things that
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud that I did. I think I did really well, which is like 90% of my daughter's clothing is secondhand through buy nothing groups, through family, and she really doesn't have any new toys. I try to tell people not to buy her toys because she really is very entertained by like a cardboard box and doesn't need a ton of toys. But it's a constant back and forth. Like I think about the guilt a lot.
Mm-hmm. And as moms, we already have so much guilt that we don't need to add any more to it. I mean, I don't know if it happens to you, but mom guilt is a
Oh
real
yeah.
thing. Just like, and I mean, you're a professional and you work, right? So for you, it might be just like look a little differently. But I can imagine if I had to like step out and work, I'd have that mom guilt where I'm like, I know I'm doing something that I love and I want to do and I need to do maybe to like, bring in income. But
Totally.
it's also like that facet where you're like, I don't want to leave my like child, I have that
Yeah.
mom guilt. And for me, I don't have to go out of the house and work, right? But there's times when you really do have to take time for you, and like say like date night is something that me and my husband, like we strive to have at least one every so often, because he travels so much for work, and it's not like he has free evenings ever, hardly, but when he does, we try to maximize that for our relationship purposes, right? And so I definitely try to not guilt myself for something that I know is like important for our marriage and thus for raising children, right? But
Yeah.
it's like, at least when she was younger, and now she's 2 and she's good, and like she loves being entertained by other people as well. But when I was nursing her full time, it was like a stressor and a guilt factor where if like I left her for even an hour, I was like, oh my God, I need to get home. Like I feel so
I
bad.
totally
Like
relate to
she's
that.
gonna miss me, and it still feels like that if I take any time for myself to do anything without her, I feel guilty. And I mean, mom guilt comes in so many like different shapes and forms, and
Totally.
for so many reasons. So it's like adding on guilt for not being perfectly sustainable
Yeah.
is rough because, as you say, like if we feel overwhelmed, it's not sustainable for us, and then we're not going to be the best parent we can be at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I will say too, even if you work and even if you don't work and you're at home with your kids, I think that's almost harder. It's almost more, it's so much work either way, and I think like you said, the guilt doesn't stop, and I will say one thing, which is I think in sustainability, there's always this balance that there are individual things you can do every day to improve your carbon footprint and reduce it. But then, there's this stat that 90% of global emissions come from corporations. So at the same time, just remember that, you are working within a system and you're doing the best you can. But if there are ways to pull levers larger than yourself, it likely will have a bigger impact than you stressing about, every single decision you make in your daily life. But I think you need both. I think both are important, individual action and systemic change, but sometimes things like voting, like being part of your community, can have a bigger impact that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like self-critical about everything you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and along that line, what are things that you can do within your community that you could recommend, moms be involved in, or maybe they can do with children that will be a sustainable thing to do, that's not just like using cloth diapers, like that's really hard.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned in the intro, I've worked in solar for the past almost 4 years actually, and I just got started. So my background is in design, but I think I was feeling frustrated by like the mismatch of what can I do in my daily life versus what is a bigger impact I can make. And I think it's like that there's like this like lever of effort that I'm really interested in, where are there things that are low effort, kind of like high impact, where if you do something small, it can have a big effect. That I think is really interesting because sometimes low effort things have a low impact and big effort things like, passing a law is like a monumental impact. So what are low effort things that can have a big impact? And I think one actually, especially in New York, if your listeners are there, is community solar. So if so this is my invention, the window solar charger. It's a solar panel that you can hang in your window, and I made it because I was really frustrated being a renter. I wanted to invest in renewable energy. I didn't have the agency and I didn't have the rooftop to do that. So I made something, and then I think from there just like dove deeper into solar and realized that there's a lot of opportunities for the average person to be involved in energy. And I think because energy is such a technical kind of non-sexy field, a lot of people don't want to do the research into it, which is why I like to do the research and try to make it easy for people. But I think one easy thing to do is joining a community solar farm, which is basically a neighborhood project that will be like a solar installation of solar panels somewhere in your area. If you're in New York, usually it's like on the top of an office building or something like that. And you can actually subscribe and sign your house up to be part of that project and get a discount on your energy bill. So that's where it's things like, offsetting your home's energy use into solar energy has such a big impact financially and emissions wise, that doing easy stuff that has a big impact is almost, I think, more worth it than obsessing over. I think for me, my guilt is like the diapers, which yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, going back to what you said about how big corporations are actually the ones who are responsible for the lack of sustainability in our society, right? It does make sense that, not that like there's this fine line, right? I've been questioned by people like, why do you care so much about like what you do? Because it's like at the end of the day, it's not that impactful. Like it's these big corporations. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm not going to let that make me like cynical and be like, okay, well, what's the point of like doing anything, because I still care about what my carbon footprint is and like what personally I'm doing or not doing, because it just doesn't feel right to do something that I know is not like good for the planet or good for society. And at the same time, as you say, one feels frustrated because it's like there's only so much that as an individual you can do if collectively we're not doing more. And so these are great tips to like kind of do something that is individual, but it's part of a bigger collective, and then it has a bigger impact as well. So yeah, that's awesome. And I did mention that I bought your little solar panel thing, and honestly, with the hurricane in Puerto Rico that happened several years ago, Hurricane Maria, where the whole island was left without power for so long. I'm like, these are the things that need to be invented and normalized and put in place, especially in countries where electricity is so expensive. Like, it's not sustainable. Like in Puerto Rico, where I'm from, where my parents live, electricity is so expensive, and it's gone part of the time. Like, we don't have
the
it
infrastructure
all the time. And so like solar energy is honestly like the way to go, I would say, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think even though the industry has been around for like 30 years, I think that it's going to get more and more affordable because it's just going to be the standard. Like you'll just need solar. And I think the more, this may be getting too deep, but the more that we can make the grid more resilient and people can be more independent about the energy that they produce, it just makes sense for everyone. You can save money. You even save your utility company money because they're not dealing with blackouts. They're not dealing with needing to produce that energy themselves, which I know terrifies them. But I think, I think it is. I think it is the future. I think what excites me too is the creative aspect in that. I think the more standard solar becomes, I think it's going to come in different shapes, sizes, colors, designs, because people will want different things. And I think that's really exciting because that to me will say that the market has really come a long way, that they don't always have to look the same because people will want them to look cool.
Right. Yeah. And as a designer, I'm sure that's like one of the main things. It's like, well, how can I make this look cool so that it's inviting? And as you say, like a lot of people are drawn. I think that's why iPhone is so successful. Like, it's just people love like cool aesthetics, like obviously the functionality of it matters, but if it looks cool, I think more people will be like kind of inclined to see, oh, what's that? And be more interested. So I'm sure as a designer, that's really awesome that that's something that you can.
Like it has to look cool. I mean, I feel the same way about sustainability. Like I wish that more sustainable topics just like looked and seemed cooler and like sexier. And like I think the more people get into it, the more that the design will improve because it means that it's a priority.
Hola mi gente, this is Katia and I hope you've been enjoying the episode. As many of you know, the topics I was passionate about before becoming a parent have only intensified now that I'm a mom. One of these topics is environmental awareness and sustainability, which is the main topic of our episode today. While I am passionate about sustainability, I am by no means perfect in living a fully sustainable life, which is why I am so grateful for our sponsors on today's episode, Cycle powered by RTS. Have you ever felt the energy in a stadium? Every fan united, cheering for their team, or watching your favorite artist perform at your favorite venue? Now, imagine channeling that same collective energy towards sustainability. With Cycle powered by RTS, that's exactly the experience we're aiming for. At your favorite events, in between the exciting moments, you might find yourself with an empty bottle or can. Cycle's reverse vending machines seamlessly integrate into these venues, transforming the act of recycling from a chore into an engaging, rewarding experience. Simply insert your beverage container, scan the QR code, and receive immediate rewards. It's about making recycling not just an afterthought, but an integral part of the event experience. Can't find cycle at your stadium or venue? Shoot the venue a DM and request it. Enhance your experience and contribute to sustainability. As a mom and advocate for the environment, I believe that when we simplify eco-friendly actions and make them enjoyable, more people will naturally want to participate. If you're intrigued and want to be part of this green revolution at stadiums and venues, click on the link in the episode description. Together, let's reshape the future of recycling with Cycle. And now back to our episode.
That's all so great. Such great information for my listeners. And like, again, I've put so much pressure on myself that I'm like not as sustainable as I'd like to be and all of these things. But so much pressure being a mom as it is.
Yeah, I do it too. We should stop putting so much pressure on ourselves. It's easier said than done, but I do it to myself too. It's so hard.
Yeah, I mean, and especially if you have the personality you have to be a perfectionist, I'm sure it's even, harder for people like that. For me, I don't consider myself a perfectionist, but I'm very self-critical. So, if I'm not doing something that I know I could do better, I'm just like, I feel that guilt and shame.
Yeah.
But what I think ultimately want to teach my children in kind of all facets of life is that the goal isn't perfection, The goal is to do what you can and to do what's right. If you know better, then do better.
Yeah.
But it's not a matter of reaching perfection. Like that's not the ultimate goal because that's not possible, first of all.
Yeah.
And it sort of ties into like other aspects in society where, like at least I think we're both the mom of girls. You have a girl, right?
Yeah.
I have a little girl and this is kind of a tangent, but not really because it's all on the same, wavelength of perfection is not the goal, where looking a certain way. I feel like nowadays it's like getting all this work done and you have to like look a certain way and aesthetically like this is the standard of perfection that you have to adhere to. And it's like, no, that's not what I want my children to learn. I want them to know that making mistakes and being imperfect is fine as long as you're trying to be a good person and a good human and you're doing something positive just for yourself and the people around you.
Yeah, that's such a good lesson. I worry, I mean, this is like 10 years from now, but I worry about my daughter just having to deal with social media in a way that I never had to deal with growing up. And, oh God,
Right.
I think it's especially difficult
Me
for
too.
girls.
Yes, absolutely. And girls because they're in a time where they have so much access to just seeing what other, people are doing
Yeah.
and like where we're at and like what celebrities are kind of prioritizing also. It's just TikTok, I don't know, TikTok has this big impact on this new generation
Yeah.
where like they see everything.
You
and
can
like
just
the little
compare
girls,
yourself so easily.
like they do their makeup way better than I do. Yeah, it's just so much they're just so much just thrown at them. And it's like all this over information and over stimulation of just things that I'm like, I didn't have to deal with any of that when I was their age,
Yeah.
So it's crazy. And so I want them to like care a little more about what they do that impacts, society rather than how they look and like,
Yeah,
that's
that makes total sense.
it's a fine line.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think with like TikTok and Instagram, there's like wonderful things about those apps, but then there's the other side of the anxiety and self-criticism that is scary. So if you can teach core values outside of the technology, I think that's definitely the way to go. Katia, I'm actually curious to hear from you. What's like a mom eco tip that you love and that you're proud of?
So early on, I mentioned that I nursed full time,
Yeah.
right? Until she was 2+, right? And even though I didn't pump that much, because I was with her all the time,
Yeah.
when I did pump, I wanted to make sure I wasn't using like these single-use like milk bags that were like plastic and you just use
Yeah.
them once and throw them away. And I felt like that was really wasteful. So I got these like silicone bags that are reusable,
Oh,
right?
amazing.
And they, yeah, and so I used the Haka first for like to collect milk. So that
Oh,
was,
oh my God, I love the Haka.
yeah,
Love it.
yeah, and it was great because I overproduced for some time, and so I just kind of collected from the other breasts while I nursed on one side, so I didn't even have to pump that much. And then when I did store my milk, it was in those reusable little bags. So I was proud of that because I was like, I'm not throwing away these bags every time, I use the milk. So that
Yeah.
was one thing that I thought, I made sure that it wasn't like single use. And with diapers, like I tried to seek out the brands that seemed least harmful. And I know a lot of
Yeah.
brands greenwash nowadays, so it's like how much
Yeah, it's hard
it's
to
hard to
tell.
tell. Yeah, like they advertise it as like, it's more sustainable or it's more recyclable, whatever. And I'm like, I want to believe it, but honestly, like I also didn't do such a deep dive into like how true is this, because that's the way to go. Technically, they say like see if you're being greenwashed and then do more research. I did like the minimal amount, to be honest, with diapers because I was like, it's marketed as
Yeah.
such.
Well, it takes time
Yeah,
too.
it's time
Like all of this
consuming.
takes time.
It's
Yeah.
time consuming, and it's like it's really disappointing when you find out that it's not as green as you thought it was, and it's like, oh, what do I do now? Now I know that it's not green, and I feel bad, and even worse because it's like, it's like that sounds terrible because it's like, well, ignorance is not a good excuse, but I tried to find a diaper that seemed less harmful, and so it was like a special select like Huggies brand that was apparently made with more sustainable materials than like the alternatives.
Oh, okay.
So I did that. And since she's my first and there's no babies in my family, like I was I was the pioneer there. I had babies first. So no, I didn't have hand-me-downs. I grew up with hand-me-downs. So that was a way I think my mom was
Yeah.
sustainable with us too. So that's something I will incorporate with as I continue to have children. I'll try to pass down as much as I can.
Yeah.
So I think you had that advantage over me where you have siblings with children, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually the youngest of four girls. So I have two older sisters who each had three kids, and then I had my first daughter. So it's actually been really special because my daughter Ruby will wear clothes that like five other kids have worn, and we'll have pictures and we can like compare
Oh,
them. And that part has been really fun and nice to share that experience with. And I think when she grows up, we'll be able to show her like, oh, your cousin wore this, and you were the fifth one to wear this. And I really love
yeah.
that part of. I think clothes especially are so emotional. Like I have a couple onesies from when she was first born that I don't think I'll ever be able to get rid of. I just like look at them sometimes and they're so special.
Aw. Yeah, see that those are really neat things that I haven't been able to experience because I am also the
Yeah.
youngest of three though, but I was the first to have children. So as I said, I there haven't been
Oh,
really
okay.
many hand-me-downs to be given to my first, but from now on there will be. So I'll try to definitely
Yeah,
incorporate.
if you can be the
Yeah.
one to,
And then
yeah,
that's a great way
yeah,
also.
yeah, yeah.
I know like in the fashion industry, it's talked about a lot, like fast fashion and just like what you can do to repurpose and reuse clothes. So that's another thing. How do you view that aspect of sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I sometimes get into I get into these not really arguments but like discussions with my friends and one of my sisters about this. I think as a person who's really interested in sustainability, sometimes you have to pick your
Mhm.
battles when you talk to other people about it. I don't know if you've experienced that too, where like I'll have a friend like brag about how she bought this dress at Target for like $4. And I just have to be like, oh no, like, do you realize the system that you're buying into is, unfair labor, unfair wages, unsafe conditions, the clothes is not high quality, all this stuff. But because it was $4, I don't really blame them because it's so inexpensive. But I think sometimes, the the most sustainable option isn't always the cheapest, which is really hard because sometimes you can't afford that. Sometimes you can't afford to buy the best sustainable quality stuff, which is really unfortunate. I will say with fast fashion, I think, from Forever 21 and H&M and Zara becoming so popular in the last 20 years, it's really changed the perception of how much clothes should cost, which is really unfortunate because I think if you actually did the math on quality clothes, over time, you would actually save money. If you bought a really quality dress for like $100 instead of $9 at H&M, but you had it for X amount of time, you would actually save money and you would save, a lot of landfill pollution of clothes just because of the trend. So I think with sustainability, sometimes it really is that perception of saying instead of buying this one thing to wear for a month, like shift it and like how could you buy something that you could wear for a long time or keep it in the circular economy where someone else can wear it and it becomes valuable. And yeah, I could talk about that forever. I think it's so unfortunate because it's hard to resist something that is so affordable. So it's sometimes I find myself being super critical, but then also you don't want to fault anyone for getting something that they might have needed. And yeah, it takes time and effort and a lot of times money to be more sustainable, unfortunately, today, because it's not necessarily the most mainstream way to go.
Right. It's not accessible, ironically, to be sustainable always, and that was another point I'm glad you brought up because I wanted to make that point as well, to where like when people kind of, like I feel bad because I'm at a point where like now I have a certain privilege that maybe I didn't have before, right? Where I can like afford certain things that like, like this glass bottle probably costs maybe $3 more than its alternative, right? So I can make that choice a lot easier maybe than other people. And yet I did grow up not with the same privileges and I had the awareness. So I knew what I wanted to prioritize, right? So there was something that like kind of upset me like growing up where my friends would be like, oh, well, we can't afford to be like vegetarian or whatever. And I'm just like, it's really a matter about prioritizing. Like I'm not like my parents are spending more money, yes, on like good food that they know is healthier and more sustainable perhaps, but we don't have other luxuries that maybe you have. Like we didn't have like a plasma TV, we didn't have nice cars, we didn't have like other things that my friends' parents did have. Like, it's like kind of a give and take. It's like, what are you willing to sacrifice to have something that matters more to you, right? And so when you have to choose, it's like, it's all about really what's more important to you, right? And so it's not to say like you can't have nice things if you're going to be sustainable, right? It's more so like it's a balance. You decide what matters, you decide what matters for you to teach your children, and you do that, and for you, being sustainable means that, you pick one thing to do, then that's fine. That's the one thing that you're going to kind of stick to, and that's sustainable for you, right? So it'll look differently for everyone. And as you say, it's unfortunately not affordable or as accessible to be sustainable in all facets of life, unfortunately. But fast fashion is something that, as you say, it's unfortunate that, because like even I shop at Zara, like I admit it, because I think the clothes are cute and they're affordable.
They are.
And it's like, I try to make them last as much as I can. Like I wear things till no end, like honestly, until they're like breaking and I'm like, okay, well, I actually have to get rid of this. But I do definitely try to be aware of what I'm buying and how much of it I'm buying and like, do I really need this or that? So it's tough because I can't justify sometimes spending X amount of money on like a t-shirt that's like higher quality, but at the end of the day, it's still like a t-shirt that I'm probably going to get dirty having a toddler. Like it's going to get dirty at some point. So I mean, I'm ranting about like the thoughts that go on in my mind where I'm just like, do I not? Like, what are the pros and cons
Yeah.
for me?
No, I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
No, I totally get it. And actually a friend shared this with me when we were having a similar conversation. I think one way to think about sustainability is sort of like it's an ongoing balance. So like, I think for me, I have a lot of friends who are vegan, where I'm just not 100% vegan, but I might choose, I've chosen to reduce the amount of meat that I eat, but I'm not totally vegan. And I think there's another source of guilt where I'm like, oh no, I'm not 100% vegan, but it just didn't make sense for me. And the fact that I chose to like go from 100% meat to like 60% was a big change for me. And it was sort of like what I was ready to do. And I think similarly to there's, I'm talking about meat consumption, but there's like meat consumption, energy consumption, single waste plastic, there's fast fashion. There's all these buckets of things that we might do in our daily lives. And I think it's just about the awareness and saying, okay, like for this period of my life, I'm going to do a little bit less, and then I might go back and I might come back. And it's just like knowing that there's going to be seasons, right? There's going to be seasons in your life where you might do more of something and less of something and more of something and less of something. But I think if you have a long-term commitment to say, I'm really going to try to do better and I'm going to make commitments to reduce things and consciously think about things, I think that's a huge step. Just like even when you were saying you think about the purchases at Zara, I think that's a big step, even just to take that time to think about it and just know that you're not going to do it perfectly. You're not. Like you could, I could see myself doing this where you don't buy any new clothes for 5 years and then you see something amazing at Zara. You should buy it, like, I think that's okay. I think otherwise, if you try to be perfect, you might, it's almost like exercising. If you like try to be perfect all the time, you're going to fall back on to a bad habit. So just accept that it's going to be a mix all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And, going back to what you just said about how, my ADHD brain, I'm like suddenly forgetting, don't
worry.
So for me, as you said, like the being vegetarian, that's something I grew up like that, right? So it's like I have, I guess, that little bit of that advantage to where it wasn't a decision I came to make later on in life. Like early on, it was made for me. And then once I was old enough to decide for myself, I chose to continue to live that way, right? And there were very strong ethical reasons for that. And so that's something that's just been unwavering in my life. So I give, all the credit to my mom for having begun that. And she like was good about not like imposing it on us when we were older. It was like, here's all the information, here are articles, you make your own decisions, this is how I chose to live my life. You guys are adults, do whatever you want kind of thing, or teenagers at that point. And I felt very strongly about the reasons I was vegetarian. And, I ultimately do want to maybe be vegan one day. It's just right now in the season where I eat eggs. I don't do much dairy, but those are just things where for me that's been kind of unwavering, right? But I'm not really great at doing other things, right? For you, it's like, what makes sense to you for whatever season in your life you're in. And that was a really good point you made, because it's really important to know that, everything's a season and you can always choose differently, and you don't have to go to extremes. Like you don't have to go from eating meat to not eating at all. Like you can reduce your consumption, which was the example you gave, which I thought was great, because it's sort of the same for everything. Like you don't become suddenly zero waste, like you start with some things and you reduce and reuse as much as you can, and you're never going to be like fully perfect at it. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. And I think if you try to do something overnight like that, just like black and white, then you're probably more likely to fail, honestly, because it's such a big sudden change. Like it took, my husband and I actually did this experiment where on meat consumption. Have you ever seen that movie Okja?
Yeah.
It's like OKJA.
Yeah.
JA. I found it so incredibly moving and traumatizing. It really, really affected me seeing that. And it's like a commentary on the cattle and factory farming industry. For anyone that hasn't seen it, I recommend it. That from that time that we watched it, and this is like 5 years ago, we watched this doc. It's not quite a documentary. It's like a, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a educational mock drama movie.
Right.
But ever since we watched that, and it's a story about a girl and a like super pig that she becomes friends with, and the pig ends up in a factory farm, and it's basically about factory farming and how horrible the conditions are. We decided that we used to eat like pork all the time, and then we decided that we would try to only eat pork once a month. Once a month, that was it. It would be like special. And then after a few months, I just forgot and I just stopped eating pork. I just completely forgot that we had said that. And it took a couple months. And then now it's really like a rare occasion that I decide maybe I'll eat some pork today, but it's very rare. And I honestly don't really want it anymore. And it took years, but it started with that one conscious decision of, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to eat less and see how I feel. And I ended up really liking it. And if I hadn't watched that movie, I wonder how long it would have took me to get there. But it was a really like important learning process for both of us, because if you had told me like stop eating pork tomorrow, I probably would have been like, oh, like that's too much. But it was very gradual, and eventually I just don't eat it anymore, and it didn't feel like a big deal.
Yeah, that's really encouraging to hear, because I think a lot of people just think like in extremes, they're just like, oh, like I could never not eat meat. And I'm like, well, it's not about not doing it. It's about being conscious of when you do it and maybe just doing it a little less, and that goes for all other things. Like, yeah, as you said, shop at Zara if you need to, but maybe less than, otherwise you would have, because you have the awareness and you're conscious of this. And
yeah, because if everyone just did like 5% less globally, that would be massive. So I think that incremental change, while it's not maybe as satisfying to be like, I don't do this anymore, it makes a really big difference when you actually like measure everything up.
Yeah. And supply and demand. I mean, if we want those big corporations to stop doing things, we should like stop asking for them to make, single-use bottles and all that. But that's a much, I think, more complex conversation that takes more time.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe a thought to land on is we've been talking about how we beat ourselves up for the individual things we haven't been able to do. But I think if you zoom out and look at the system of just like how the economy works, like companies are designed to sell as much stuff as possible at the most affordable price and to market to us in a way that makes it very enticing. So, while we are making the best individual choices we can, like individuals don't really, have the upper hand when it comes to making those purchasing decisions in a way that you feel really good about, just because there's this big machine that is designed to sell you stuff. So I think, if you have those moments where you bought something and you're like, oh no, it was designed that way, that's what capitalism does. So I think just owning the fact that you have buying power and that buying less and doing less does make a big difference in that sort of corporation machine that you can't control by yourself, I think is really encouraging, and just keeping that context that really every decision you make can have an impact if you want it to, and that you're never too small to do something.
Love that. Thank you so much. On that note, I will end today's episode. But Krystal, you've been such an amazing guest. I've been dying to have you on my podcast for a long time. I'm so happy it finally worked out. And thank you so much for your insight and for taking time away from your busy, impressive life. I admire you so much, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. No, this was great. I feel like it's rare that you get to complain and talk about how hard being a sustainable mom is. So I'm grateful for the time too.
Gracias, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Unaparent podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe as we release a new episode at least every month with an exciting new guest. Be sure to also follow us on Instagram for all the Unaparent content you never knew you needed.